Welcome to this interim presentation of the Clones Heritage and Economic Plan. My name is James Hennessy from the Paul Hogarth Company, and I'm going to talk you through the initial findings of the analysis process. The plan has been commissioned by Clones Town team with funding from Leader and has been prepared by the Paul Hogarth Company and Dixon Fitzgerald Architects. Through this plan, we're going to be developing a shared vision for the future of Clones and identifying a series of projects which can stimulate the social, economic and physical regeneration of the town and can avail of funding opportunities that are currently there for such town centre projects. We've been busy gathering information, and that includes desktop research, visits to the town and the community survey, which took place online due to the COVID-19 restrictions. We're now analysing that information before developing concepts and designs, and there'll be another public consultation process taking place soon over the summer where the public are invited to give their feedback on draft proposals. It's really important that we work together with the people of Clones so that the resultant plan reflects the aspirations of everyone in the town. The process takes place in the context of national and local policy, including Project Ireland 2040, the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, the County Development Plan, and the Local Economic and Community Plan. We'll also be taking into account the climate emergency and the need for Clones and all our towns and villages to be following a more sustainable trajectory in the coming years ahead. There's been some great work in Clones, and we fully recognise the impact that has had, and it's evident around us. This is not about reinventing the wheel. This is about providing a shared roadmap for the future regeneration of Clones so that we can integrate ongoing work but also identify gaps where further investment is needed. So now we'll take a quick look at the findings of the public consultation process. We had a great response with over 150 online questionnaires completed and a lot of interaction on social media. The majority of respondents live in Clones, visiting there every day. Interestingly, we also had people participating in the survey who perhaps used to live in Clones or have family connections to the town. And that helps us get a rounded perspective of thoughts and views about the town today. We asked people what top 3 things they liked about Clones, and this included people, home and community, history, architecture, and the old buildings and diamond, shops, services and amenities. So if you look at those together, you can see that almost 30% of responses revolved around people, home and community, and almost a quarter were linked to the architecture, history of the town. We also asked people what they didn't like about Clones, and number 1 on their list was dereliction and vacant buildings, but also concern regarding the retail offering and the economic situation in the town. So you can see, once again, almost a third of respondents highlighted dereliction, while 18% talked about retail and issues regarding shopping. How important do you think the heritage of Clones is for the future of the town? That received a very strong response, with 74% saying it's very important and 22% important. We also asked people what they thought was particularly unique or special about the heritage of Clones, and again we had a really good response to that question. It became clear that the iconic built heritage, and in particular the diamond, the round tower and the abbey were highlighted. The connectivity, and an interesting phrase, the time capsule of Ireland, which talks about the multi-layered history that is visible within the town. Also the socio-cultural heritage and the opportunity for discovery. The following slides are some of our thoughts in response to the consultation findings, but also our desktop and site visits research. It's very important that we think about the regional context of Clones and its location on the border, but also on important movement routes, be it the road network, and also the Ulster Canal. And this, of course, is going to be an important part of its future attraction as an increased place for visiting and exploring the region. In studying the town, it's interesting to see that history and the obvious signs of the industrial past going through the town. And even from this aerial photograph, you can see the old line of the railway and the canal to the south of the town. The built form of Clones is in itself a really fascinating aspect, and this wonderful plan from the early 19th century shows very clearly the compact town and the wonderful geometry of the diamond at its centre, as well, of course, as the older heritage of the round tower and the fort. Over time, when the canal and the railway arrived into the town, you can see the extent of that infrastructure, the important role that Clones had. But also what's interesting is that the town hasn't grown greatly from that period. So whilst we do see a development to the north and to the west, you still have a very compact town centre and a really intact area of historic urban realm, which is a real positive to work with. And of course, we have a number of protected structures and scheduled monuments populated within the centre of Clones, and that's a real asset, and these are very important to its character and identity. But also, as mentioned, we have that compact town centre, and that's very important because it is within easy walking reach of destinations. It's a compact centre, it's walkable, and that's very important indeed. Also, these regional linkages, be it the canal, the roads, or potentially the old railway lines, they offer an opportunity for future connection with surrounding areas as well. Clones has a really strong history and character to it, and it's really a massive part of its identity. And there's been a lot of great work in the past to restore and conserve the architecture and built elements around the town. There's some iconic landmarks such as the Round Tower, but also there's those small areas of detail, little pieces of architecture, of signage, etc., which are as much part of the story of Clones. Views are a really important part of the landscape, and Clones is interesting because it has quite complex topography. Therefore, you get little glimpses of views around the town, be it towards one of the two churches or indeed to the Round Tower. And understanding where those views are will be very important as we think about the development of the town and its role, for example, for tourism. The topography is really interesting as well. Of course, Clones sits within that whole region of drumlins, and there's some wonderful views through the town to the hills and down from those to the town, which again are very important and part of the character of the town. Let's not forget about trees as well. So whilst we have some wonderful landmark buildings, there's some very prominent trees around Clones, and these are integral to the character and identity of the town. It's very important that we look after these, but also we'll need to start thinking about their future succession and where trees should be planted in the future. There are a number of sites of significance, including the old graveyard and Round Tower, as well as the wee abbey, which is immensely important, although unfortunately not accessible to everyone throughout the year. The diamond is a really special urban space as well. It really is unique in an Irish context, and we think that's something which needs to be fully understood, and the potential of that space is going to be an important part of the plan going forward. And that, of course, includes the monuments and various locations around the diamond, and of course the stories that sit behind those as well. Investment in buildings around there is very evident and very welcomed, and how can we build upon that to really make the most of that unique asset? In places, there's some things which detract from the quality, however, and we have to be thinking about the proliferation of signage, of bollards, of planters, and various elements which can perhaps sometimes get in the way of the view. Clones has an immensely interesting social and cultural heritage linked to sport and to culture and the industrial past as well. And that's a real wonderful asset, but we have to work out how we can start to tell those stories, to share them with new generations, but also the role they might play in the visitor experience in the town. There's also some excellent sporting facilities now in Clones thanks to the PeaceLink project, and that presents a wonderful opportunity. How well this area is connected to the rest of the town is something that we might be looking at, because it's such an important asset and access to it is really critical. There's been some great projects around the town as well, and some lovely pieces of public art. And what's important about these is these are really high quality interventions. And that's very important, that any intervention in the public realm is of great quality. But more generally, there's a real evidence of community spirit within Clones, be it through projects around the town, which show the care and attention, but also through the many clubs and societies and activities that are happening in Clones. We also understand the role of the schools and the colleges is a particularly important part of life in Clones as well. There's been a lot of work on the presentation of Clones, and it's very impressive indeed. The town looks very good. There's some excellent floral planting, the maintenance levels are high, and that's something to be really proud of. Some great projects as well, such as the All-Island Pollinator Plan and the wildlife interventions, and that's interesting because that introduces a different perspective on the potential for environmental improvements around the town. We're also very impressed by the heritage trail within Clones, and this excellent format for signage is just enough to give visitors information about the buildings and spaces and significance of sites around Clones. Although it is notable that a number of these buildings are rather quiet, to what extent can they be opened up and enjoyed by the visitor as well as locals alike? These recent murals as well are also a wonderful, quite bold intervention in the historic town and really give a dynamic contemporary take on Clones and the vibrancy of its community. The canal, of course, is a very important part of the town, and increasingly so, with plans to reopen the canal as far as Clones. So this becomes very important, and we need to be thinking about the relationship of this part of the town and the canal stores with the remainder of Clones and its centre and its other attractions. We've also got some very contemporary architecture in the library, which is great to see, but we think perhaps the setting of that and its relationship with the historic town might need some work. At the moment, some areas do feel like they're round the back of the town rather than an integral part of the centre. And as I mentioned before, another important strength of Clones is the many events and activities that are organised locally and the number of clubs and organisations which are really doing great things in the town, even through the difficult times that we've had recently with the coronavirus lockdown. I mentioned big plans, and plans to extend the canal as far as Clones from Belturbet, but also eventually on all the way to Lough Neagh are really significant. That presents a wonderful opportunity for tourism, but what we have to do is think about how the town can capitalise upon that to make sure that results in an economic impact for businesses and residents within the town as well. So we've got many positives of Clones to build upon. But of course, there's some negatives as well, and we need to look at these very carefully. Dereliction and vacancy was highlighted in the community survey, and it's true that it's evident around parts of the town centre. It's a challenge that towns and villages across Ireland are faced with, and unfortunately there aren't easy solutions. However, the work that is ongoing to restore properties is to be really commended. And we now need to be thinking about other locations around the town, how in the short term they can be improved to take the edge off the negative visual impact they have on the town, but how in long term we can find sustainable uses for these buildings. A fascinating thing about Clones is the hidden heritage. For example, this is the path to the Norman Motte, and it's quite an experience going up that path, and it's intriguing to follow it through, and you get to the small viewing area that's there. However, it's also a little bit disappointing because you really would like to explore further and to really engage more with the heritage in that area. As I mentioned before, access is also important, and for good reason. The Wee Abbey is not available all the time. It's important that it's safe for visitors to be there. However, we need to find ways to make sure that these heritage locations are accessible and open to the public. It's also very interesting to learn about the recently discovered castle in Clones, and whilst that is in an area surrounded by private land ownership, you do wonder in the future if there might be scope for that to be opened up, at least visually, if not physically, for access. Now, like many towns, we have to strike a balance between vehicles and pedestrians, and on a busy day, Clones can be very much dominated by vehicles, particularly those large lorries and tractors thundering their way through the diamond. We need to think about the distribution of car parking so that it is in the right place to support businesses and to provide for residents, but also to ensure that the public realm isn't dominated by the car and that there's space for other activities and events. It's noticeable in some locations you have very narrow footpaths, and that's an issue particularly where you have a high footfall, such as on match days at the GA Stadium. A lot of concern has been raised about the low levels of economic activity, and this is reflected again across Ireland as town centres change their function. We see a lot of retail moving online, but also you're left with buildings which perhaps have lost their purpose, and it's really important that we find sustainable new uses for these wonderful buildings. And while there's been great work to look at environmental improvements around Clones, there is of course still some areas where there's room for improvement, be it to do with the quality of frontages or fences and boundaries or the landscape that's there. And whilst there has been a lot of work to look at issues such as dogfiling, sometimes the signage and the messaging can actually be detracting from the overall quality of the place. Another important consideration is shop fronts, and there's some very attractive historic shop fronts within Clones, and there's a continued need to work with businesses to look at how we can make sure that signage, lighting, and the presentation of shops helps those businesses, but also is complementary to the heritage character of the town as a whole. And signage on the edge of town is very important as well. Those first impressions. How does Clones welcome you as you arrive? But also, where does it welcome you? And in some places there are multiple signs, whereas actually we could maybe look at announcing those locations and celebrating those great gateways. As I said before, we think the Heritage Trail is excellent, and it gives everyone an opportunity to learn about the significance of the history of the town. We've also been asked to look at street furniture, so we've taken a more detailed look at various components, and one of the considerations is about consistency. What kind of street furniture should a town like Clones have, and how can we make sure that future projects have a degree of consistency with those? So there's a number of different styles of litter bins around the town, and of planters, which are wonderfully planted, but we need to think about the quality and character of those around the town. Seating is also very important, and again there's a number of different styles, but as important as the style is the location. Where do people want to sit? Where's the best location for seats around the town? Which areas are missing areas of seating? Signage is another consideration. Yes, we need signage to help navigate, to help direct road traffic, etc. We also have signage that tells history and stories about the town. But we need to be very careful that it doesn't proliferate, it doesn't become cluttered and detract from the beauty of the town that it's trying to help people orientate through. Lighting is another important consideration. Of course, it's essential that the town is well lit and feels safe and attractive in the hours of darkness. We also need to think about the consistency and the style of lighting, bearing in mind that we are in a heritage town, but not necessarily resorting to a pastiche of styles of street furniture. So that's an overview of some of our observations with regards to the analysis of Clonus at the moment. As I said, there's a lot of positives, and those are essential to build upon, but there are also some challenges that we need to look at improving and tackling as part of the heritage and economic plan. We'll now be moving into the concept and design stage, and we'll be back in touch soon with information about the draft plan, and we very much look forward to the input of local people, of businesses, of organisations, as well as elected members, so that we can make sure that the resultant plan reflects the aspirations and needs of Clonus and sets in place a roadmap for the future regeneration of the town. Thank you very much.